Welcome back to Take the Leap Management, the podcast where we explore the skills and strategies you need to thrive in your academic and professional life. I'm your host, and today we're tackling a topic that's at the very heart of academic research: finding and creating a good research question. Whether you're just starting out on a research project, writing a dissertation, or thinking about a potential thesis, crafting a strong research question is often the most challenging and crucial step. It sets the entire foundation for your study, shaping your research direction, methods, and ultimately the impact of your work. So, how do you find and create a good research question? Well, that's what we're going to break down today. We'll go through the key characteristics of a solid research question, the process of refining your ideas, and some practical tips for getting started. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer sense of how to approach this important task. Let's start by talking about what makes a research question good. A strong research question isn't just something that interests you or your professor. It needs to meet certain criteria that ensure it's not only relevant but also feasible to explore. First and foremost, your research question needs to be clear and focused. If it's too broad, you'll end up with a vague or overly general study, and if it's too narrow, you might not have enough material to explore. For example, if you're studying leadership and management, a broad question like, "What is leadership?" isn't really helpful. It's too big. But a more focused question like, "How does transformational leadership affect employee retention in mid-sized companies?" is much more specific, and that's a good thing. A focused research question allows you to narrow down the scope of your study and gives you a clear direction. This kind of clarity will help guide not only your research methods, but also your literature review and data collection. Another key characteristic of a good research question is that it should be researchable. That means you need to be able to gather data or find existing literature to address it. A question that's too abstract or speculative, like, "What will leadership look like in 100 years?" might be fascinating, but it's hard to research with the tools available today. Instead, aim for something that you can investigate through surveys, experiments, observations, or secondary data. A good research question is also original, but don't worry, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Originality doesn't always mean coming up with a completely new idea that no one's ever thought of before. It could simply mean approaching an existing problem from a different angle. For instance, maybe a lot of studies have already looked at leadership styles and employee satisfaction, but few have explored how those dynamics play out in remote teams versus in-office teams. That's a fresh take on a well-researched topic, and it can still make an important contribution to the field. Finally, a good research question should be significant. That is, it should contribute to your field of study or help solve a real-world problem. Ask yourself, why does this question matter? Who benefits from knowing the answer? If the answer to those questions isn't clear, you might want to reconsider or refine your question to make sure it's worth exploring. All right, now that we've outlined the characteristics of a good research question: clear, focused, researchable, original, and significant, let's talk about how you actually go about finding and creating one. Step one is always to start with your interests. Think about the topics or problems that fascinate you in your field. What do you enjoy learning or reading about? What issues or gaps in the literature have caught your attention? The more passionate you are about your topic, the easier it will be to stay engaged with the research process, which can be long and sometimes frustrating. Once you have a general area of interest, the next step is to explore the existing literature. This is absolutely critical. A good research question doesn't exist in isolation. It builds on what's already been studied. By reviewing academic papers, books, and articles on your topic, you'll start to get a sense of what's already known and where the gaps are. Look for unanswered questions, inconsistencies in the findings, or areas where more research is needed. This will help you identify a specific angle for your own question. For example, if you're interested in workplace diversity, you might find that there's a lot of research on diversity and productivity, but fewer studies on diversity and innovation. That could be your starting point. As you're reviewing the literature, take notes and highlight recurring themes or debates. These could lead you to your research question. And don't be afraid to question the assumptions in the existing research. Sometimes challenging the status quo can lead to great research questions. Now, once you've gathered some background knowledge, it's time to narrow down your focus. This is where a lot of students get stuck. They have a general topic but struggle to pin down a specific question. One useful technique is to use the who, what, where, when, and why approach. Ask yourself, who is affected by this issue? What are the key variables or concepts I want to explore? Where does this phenomenon occur? When is it relevant? Past, present, future? And most importantly, why does it matter? For instance, if your topic is workplace diversity and innovation, you might ask yourself, who does diversity impact most in the workplace? Is it new hires, senior management, or specific departments? What exactly do I want to measure? Team performance, creativity, or innovation rates? Where should I focus my research, on large corporations, startups, or a specific industry? And finally, why is this important? Is it because companies with diverse teams perform better, or because it reflects broader social changes? By answering these questions, you can start to shape your research question into something more specific and focused. The next step is refining your question. Once you've come up with a potential research question, it's time to refine it. One of the best ways to do this is by discussing your question with your professors, colleagues, or peers. They can provide valuable feedback on whether your question is clear, focused, and feasible. Also, don't be afraid to revise your question multiple times. Research is an iterative process. What seems like a great question at first might turn out to be too broad or too narrow after you start diving into the literature. That's normal. Be prepared to tweak and adjust your question until you find the right balance. Finally, let's talk about testing your question by thinking ahead. Once you have a solid research question, ask yourself, is this something I can realistically answer with the time and resources I have? What methods will I use to gather data, and are they practical? Does my question allow for a clear argument or hypothesis to be developed? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you're likely on the right track. So, to recap, a good research question is clear, focused, researchable, original, and significant. Start with your interests, review the literature, narrow down your focus, and refine your question through feedback. Most importantly, make sure your question is something that excites you. After all, you'll be spending a lot of time with it. That's all for today's episode of Take the Leap Management. If you found this helpful, be sure to subscribe and share the podcast with others. Remember, a strong research question is the foundation of any successful academic project, and taking the time to craft it carefully will pay off in the long run.